The HOA had rented out my deeded garage, collected payments, and treated me like I was trespassing on my own property. I found another resident's car inside, a board-issued rental agreement tucked under the windshield wiper, and a manager insisting the space belonged to the condo. Instead of arguing in the hallway, I photographed everything and pulled my recorded deed and condo plan. One page showed the board's entire rental arrangement depended on a right it never actually had, and a new payment deadline was days away. Have you ever discovered an HOA using something you legally owned? Comment with what happened, because the recorded plan did more than prove a boundary. It exposed who had been benefiting from the mistake. To understand how the HOA got that far, I need to go back to the morning I first tried to open G12. I returned to Ridgeview Condominiums in Bay Haven County, Florida, with 3 storage bins in my car. I owned Unit 3B, along with Garage Unit G12, and I had planned to put away family papers, folding chairs, and a few tools. When I pressed the remote for G12, nothing happened. I tried again from closer range. The light blinked, but the garage door stayed shut. At the management office, the property manager checked the system and told me my remote had been deactivated. She called it a temporary access issue and handed me a building master remote so I could verify the space. That phrase bothered me. I was not asking to verify a parking assignment. I was trying to enter property listed in my deed. The door lifted, and a dark sedan was parked inside. A laminated permit hung from the rearview mirror. It carried the Ridgeview HOA logo, the number G12, and an expiration date at the end of the month. Under the windshield wiper sat a copy of a rental agreement directing monthly payments to Mason Community Management. I photographed the permit, the agreement, the garage number painted on the wall, and the car without showing its license plate. I was still taking pictures when the resident using the space walked in. He looked confused, not defensive. He said management had offered him the garage 6 months earlier because his unit did not include one. He had signed an agreement, paid $250 every month, and received a working remote from the office. As far as he knew, the arrangement was legitimate. I decided not to treat him like the problem. I told him I was not blaming him and asked him not to discard any paperwork. He agreed and let me photograph the first page of the agreement through the glass. The manager arrived and told me the garage was under association control until the board reviewed my claim. She asked me to leave and warned me not to interfere with the resident's access. I walked out without touching the car. By then, the problem was no longer a broken remote. The HOA had transferred practical control of my garage to someone else, and every lock, permit, and payment record appeared to support its version of events. At least until I checked the records. Back in my unit, I spread the closing folder across the kitchen table and started with the document that should have settled the basic question, my deed. The legal description listed Unit 3B, then separately identified Garage Unit G12. It was not described as a temporary parking assignment, a common element, or a space the board could reallocate. The garage was part of what I had purchased. I kept going. My title policy referenced the same garage unit. So did the settlement statement from closing. Those records did not explain the rental, but they showed I was not relying on memory or a sales brochure. Then I opened the county recorder's online index and searched the condominium documents. The recorded condo plan took longer to read. It divided the property into residential units, garage units, limited common elements, and general common areas. On the page covering the lower level, G12 was drawn inside the block of individually owned garages. The common storage area began beyond a separate boundary line. I saved the recording information and printed the page showing G12. Next, I built a folder for everything connected to the dispute. I added the deed, title policy, settlement statement, tax record, condo plan, the photographs from the garage, the permit on the other resident's car, and the rental agreement under the windshield wiper. I also saved the manager's email saying the board would review my claim. Before the day ended, I requested the access control log for my remote. The office replied that my device had been disabled when a replacement remote was issued for G12. That was the first record showing more than a paperwork mismatch. Someone had changed who could physically enter the garage. I still did not know whether the board had made a mistake or believed it had authority I had not found. But I now had one clear starting point. Every recorded document I could locate treated G12 as mine, while the HOA's system treated it as theirs. those two versions could not both control what happened next inside that garage. The board answered the next afternoon with a document I had never seen before. It was a one-page parking schedule on Ridgeview letterhead. Every garage was listed by number, with columns for assigned owner, association reserve, and current user. G12 appeared in the reserve column. Beside it was the name of the resident whose car I had found inside. The property manager wrote that the schedule had governed garage use for years. According to her, the board could reassign any space it considered unused because the declaration gave the association authority to regulate parking and common area access. I read the cited section twice. It allowed the HOA to set traffic rules, control access devices, and regulate parking behavior in shared areas. It did not say the board could take an individually deeded garage, rent it to another resident, or collect the money. I replied with a simple question: what document transferred G12 from me to the association? The manager did not send a deed, amendment, easement, lease, or written consent. Instead, Elaine Porter, the board president, joined the email thread. She said the garage had not been used regularly and that the association had a responsibility to put limited space to productive use. She described the arrangement as an administrative assignment, not a transfer of ownership. That distinction did not solve the problem. The HOA had disabled my remote, issued another one, signed a rental agreement, and accepted monthly payments. Whatever label Elaine used, the board had exercised control that excluded me. I asked for the minutes approving the arrangement and the policy authorizing the rent. The manager said those records would be reviewed at the next board meeting, almost 4 weeks away. The current rental, she added, would remain in effect until the review ended. The 7th payment was scheduled to be processed before the meeting. The delay now looked less like confusion and more like leverage. The HOA had an internal chart, a working access system, and an existing tenant. I had recorded documents, but the board controlled the garage in practice. The dispute had shifted. I was no longer trying to fix a remote or correct a clerical error. I was challenging the board's claim that its power to manage parking somehow included the power to rent property it did not own. That deadline gave me only days to respond, and they intended to collect again before answering that question. The next morning, I sent a written objection to Elaine, the property manager, and the full board. I kept it narrow. I attached the deed, the recorded condo plan page, the photographs of G12, and the access email showing my remote had been disabled. Then I listed 5 immediate steps. Pause the 7th payment. Do not renew the rental agreement. Restore my access. Preserve every related record. And provide the document the HOA believed authorized the rental. I also gave them an easy way out. If the parking schedule was wrong, they could call it a mapping error, suspend the arrangement, and sort out the accounting afterward. I did not accuse anyone of theft or fraud. I did not demand a public apology. I asked them to stop using the garage while the records were reviewed. The manager confirmed receipt within an hour. Elaine replied later that afternoon. She said the deed did not determine how the association administered parking and repeated that G12 had been treated as association-controlled for years. She did not address the boundary line on the condo plan. She did not produce a transfer document. She did not agree to pause the payment. Instead, she wrote that the arrangement would remain in place until the board completed its review. That evening, a separate message arrived from management. It was labeled Access and Interference Notice. The notice warned me not to enter G12, block the resident's vehicle, or use any device that might disrupt the current assignment. It said unauthorized interference could result in enforcement action under the community rules. The HOA had my deed, the recorded plan, and a written request to stop. Instead of explaining its authority, it warned me away from the garage. I saved the notice as a PDF, printed a copy, and added it to the evidence folder. Then I replied once, asking management to confirm whether the 7th rent payment would still be processed despite the ownership documents I had supplied. They answered with one sentence: the account would continue as scheduled unless the board directed otherwise. The payment was now a decision the HOA intended to carry out after receiving written notice. I had given them a quiet correction path. They had chosen control instead. My next step would be to preserve that choice before anyone could rewrite a schedule, delete a message, or shift blame. The following morning, I went to the management office with the access notice, my deed, and the condo plan page clipped together. I asked for my remote to be restored. The property manager said she could not reactivate it while the board's review was pending. Instead, she placed an acknowledgement on the counter and told me I would need to sign it before receiving access. The form said I agreed not to move the resident's car, interfere with the rental arrangement, or claim exclusive control of G12 until the board reached a decision. Signing it would do more than promise I would not touch the car. It would place my ownership position inside a document written by the HOA. I declined. The manager said that refusal left her no choice but to keep the remote disabled. I asked her to confirm that decision in writing and note that I had appeared with the recorded documents. She said the office would create an incident report. I did not raise my voice. I did not try to enter the garage through another door. I did not call a locksmith or threaten to remove the car. Any of those actions could have shifted attention from the central question and given the HOA a new complaint to use against me. Before leaving, I photographed the unsigned acknowledgement and wrote down the meeting time. Later that afternoon, management emailed the incident report. It identified me as a disputed claimant who had requested access to an association-controlled garage. The report also said I had refused to sign a non-interference agreement. In the deed, I was the owner. In the HOA's file, I was merely a claimant. The practical cost arrived then. I still needed a secure place for the boxes in my car, so I rented a small storage unit across town. I saved the receipt and opened a separate expense log. I did not combine that cost with the rent the HOA had collected, because they were different losses and would need different proof. The resident using G12 emailed me that evening. He was worried he might lose the space, despite paying on time. I told him again that I did not blame him. By then, both of us were paying for the same garage in different ways. The next day, I contacted a real estate attorney whose practice included Florida condominium disputes. I sent her the deed, the condo plan page, the parking schedule, the access notice, and the incident report before our first call. She separated the questions instead of claiming the deed ended the argument by itself. The deed showed what had been conveyed to me. The condo plan showed how the property was legally divided. The declaration might define the board's management powers. Other recorded amendments, consents, or agreements could still matter. Until those records were checked, she said, the safest approach was to prove both ownership and the absence of any valid transfer or rental authority. She ordered a fuller title review. A title examiner searched the recorded declaration, amendments, plats, easements, and instruments connected to Unit 3B and G12. He found no deed transfer, lease, easement, or amendment giving the association control of the garage. He was careful about the limit of that finding. He could report what appeared in the public record, not guarantee that no private agreement had ever existed. We also hired a surveyor familiar with condominium plans. He compared the recorded drawing with the physical layout and confirmed that the boundary line placed G12 within the individually owned garage units. He did not offer a legal opinion about title. His role was to explain where the plan put the line. With those pieces in place, my attorney sent a preservation and records request to the HOA and Mason Community Management. She asked for the complete rental agreement, every payment entry, the board authorization, access control logs, the original parking schedule, all later revisions, and any recorded amendment or owner consent connected to G12. The first production arrived 2 days later. It included the rental agreement, but the approval section had been redacted. The payment page showed recurring monthly charges, yet the ledger detail was missing. The parking schedule was attached again, still without any recording number or explanation of how it overrode the condo plan. The HOA had produced paperwork, but not the document that mattered most. They could show that they had rented the garage. They still could not show why they were allowed to. My attorney noted each omission and sent a follow-up with a response deadline. Until then, she advised me to keep documenting costs, avoid confrontation, and preserve every message. The dispute was becoming more technical, but also more focused. The HOA's records proved the rental existed while leaving its claimed authority unsupported. The HOA's response arrived on the final day of my attorney's deadline. This time, the package included an older parking chart. It looked more official than the one the manager had sent before. Ridgeview's logo appeared at the top, a revision date was printed in the corner, and the bottom carried the signature of a former property manager. G12 was marked as an association reserve space. Elaine relied on that chart immediately. In her cover email, she said the document had guided garage assignments for more than a decade, and that prior owners had never objected. According to her, the long history of use showed that the association's control was legitimate, even if the recorded condo plan used different language. My attorney did not dismiss the chart. She explained that an unrecorded document was not automatically meaningless. The HOA might still argue that a prior owner had consented, that the garage had been assigned by agreement, or that years of conduct created some enforceable right. We had not found evidence supporting those theories, but we could not pretend the chart disappeared simply because it was internal. The old chart gave the board history rather than a current clerical error. It gave the board a former manager's signature, a decade of claimed use, and a reason to argue that the arrangement predated my ownership. I compared the chart with my closing file. There was no disclosure stating that G12 was controlled by the HOA. No seller consent appeared in the title package. No amendment matched the chart. Still, I did not know who created it, why the boundary treatment had changed, or whether another agreement existed outside the documents we had reviewed. My attorney asked the HOA for the chart's original creation file, revision history, distribution list, and any board minutes tied to its adoption. She also requested proof that a former owner of Unit 3B had ever agreed to surrender control. The board did not provide those records. Instead, Elaine repeated that years of practice should settle the issue, but practice was not the same as authority. The chart could explain how the HOA had operated. It did not yet explain how that operation became lawful. Proving the garage was mine might not be enough. We also had to show how an internal document became a rental right. I put the old parking chart beside the recorded condo plan and started comparing them one garage at a time. At first, the differences looked minor. The numbers were the same. The hallway and ramp were drawn in roughly the same places. But when I traced the boundary around G12, the two documents stopped matching. On the recorded plan, G12 sat inside the block of individually owned garage units. The common storage area began beyond a separate line. On the HOA chart, that line had been shifted. G12 appeared grouped with reserve spaces the board treated as community-controlled. I checked the garages on either side. Their designations had moved too. The problem was larger than a label on one space. Until then, I had been asking one question: how do I prove this garage is mine? Now the better question was, how had an internal chart replaced the recorded plan in the HOA's daily operations, and what decisions depended on that substitution? My attorney agreed. She said ownership remained central, but the chart might reveal something larger than a single assignment mistake. If the HOA had used it to issue remotes, sign rental agreements, and collect money, then the chart was not just a map. It was the operating foundation of a revenue program. We asked for the budget records connected to garage rentals. The first ledger summary showed a category labeled Garage and Storage Revenue. It did not identify every space, but it confirmed that the association had been treating garage use as an income source. The recurring payment, tied to G12, appeared inside that category. From that point on, getting my remote back was no longer the whole objective. Restoring access still mattered, but access alone would leave the system untouched. The board could call G12 an isolated error, return the key, and continue using the same chart elsewhere. So our next demand expanded in a precise way. We asked for an accounting of every payment linked to G12, the chart's revision history, the people who approved its use, and every rental agreement that relied on it. We also demanded preservation of emails, access records, and budget entries. I was careful not to assume every garage on the chart had been mishandled. The records did not prove that yet, but they did show that my garage was part of something organized. The condo plan had begun as proof of a boundary. Now it was evidence that the HOA's rental system depended on a different version of the property, one that had never been recorded and had still been used to control access and collect money. Would the board stop once that conflict was impossible to ignore? My attorney sent the formal demand the next morning. It did not accuse anyone of theft, fraud, or criminal conduct. It described the conflict in plain terms. My deed and the recorded condo plan identified G12 as private property, while the HOA's chart, access system, and rental records treated it as association controlled. The letter asked the board to stop acting on the internal chart until that conflict was resolved. The proposed steps were limited. Suspend the 7th payment. Do not renew the rental agreement. Restore my access. Place any disputed funds in escrow. Preserve every email, ledger entry, access log, and board record tied to G12. Provide a complete accounting and the document the HOA believed gave it authority to rent the garage. The letter gave the board a safe exit. If Ridgeview treated the problem as a mapping error, ended the arrangement, and corrected the records, we could address the money afterward. No public accusation was necessary. No emergency filing was necessary. The board only had to stop using the garage while the documents were reviewed. Elaine called a special board meeting 2 days later. I was not in the room, so I did not know what anyone said. What I learned came from the minutes produced afterward. They recorded that the board had reviewed my deed, the condo plan page, the old parking chart, and my attorney's demand. The minutes also showed that the board voted to continue the rental pending council review. That phrase mattered, because the payment deadline had not moved. My attorney emailed the HOA's lawyer and asked whether the 7th $250 charge would be paused. The response said management would follow the board's vote unless new instructions were issued. No new instructions came. The 7th payment processed on schedule. I saved the tenant's receipt, the updated ledger entry, and the time-stamped email confirming that the board had received our documents before the charge cleared. The amount itself was not enormous. What mattered was the sequence. The HOA had been warned, given a narrow way to stop, and shown the recorded plan. It still chose to collect again. The payment divided the record. Before it cleared, the board could argue that G12 had been swept into an old system by mistake. After it cleared, there was a new act taken with the ownership dispute directly in front of them. My attorney told me the next step would no longer be another request for patience. We would ask the circuit court to stop the arrangement before the HOA could collect again, or issue yet another access warning. The complaint was filed the following morning in the circuit court serving Bayhaven County. It asked for 3 things: a declaration identifying who controlled G12, an injunction stopping the HOA from renting or restricting access to it, and an accounting of the money already collected. My attorney also requested temporary relief because another payment cycle was approaching and my remote was still disabled. The filing did not prove our claims. It put them before a court. Ridgeview's response arrived within the week. The HOA argued that the board had broad authority to manage parking, that the garage had been treated as association controlled for years, and that my lack of regular use supported the existing arrangement. It also claimed I had accepted the system by failing to object earlier. That argument sounded stronger on paper than it felt in practice, but my attorney warned me not to dismiss it. A judge would want the full chain: what I owned, what the board believed it controlled, what records supported each side, and what had happened after notice. We organized the evidence in that order. The deed identified G12. The recorded condo plan showed its legal placement. The title review found no recorded transfer, lease, easement, or amendment giving the HOA rental authority. The association's own agreement showed that it had rented the garage. The payment ledger showed that it had collected money. The board minutes showed that it continued after reviewing my documents. The resident using G12 agreed to cooperate. He provided copies of his payment receipts and confirmed that management had given him the remote and permit. He did not oppose moving the car if the court ordered it, but he wanted enough time to arrange another space. The dispute was with the HOA, not a resident who had relied on its paperwork. At the temporary relief hearing, my attorney focused on preventing further harm without pretending every issue had already been decided. She asked the court to pause the rental, preserve the records, and restore access while discovery continued. The HOA's lawyer asked the judge to leave the arrangement in place until the case could be fully resolved. The question was whether the board could keep collecting rent while my ownership documents sat in the court file. The judge took the request under advisement and said a written ruling would follow within several business days. 3 business days later, the circuit court issued a temporary order. It did not decide the entire case. The judge did not rule on final damages, attorney fees, or every argument about the old parking chart. The order addressed the immediate risk while the records were still being tested. First, the HOA had to stop collecting rent connected to G12. It could not renew the agreement or issue a replacement assignment. Second, management had to restore my access within 48 hours. Third, every payment record, email, access log, and board document tied to the garage had to be preserved. The resident using the space was given a short period to move his car without penalty. The written ruling also required the HOA to identify the custodian of those records and prohibited either side from altering the garage, the access system, or the disputed files before further review. The right authority had acted. The county recorder had supplied the recorded documents, but the recorder had not decided ownership. The surveyor had explained the boundaries shown on the condo plan, but he had not ruled on title. The title examiner had reported that no transfer or amendment appeared in the public record, but he had not issued a judgment. The circuit court was the first actor with power to change the legal and practical status of the garage. At the hearing, the HOA had relied heavily on its internal chart and the board's general authority to regulate parking. My attorney answered with the recorded plan, the deed, the payment trail, and the absence of any document transferring G12 to the association. The judge did not treat that absence as proof of bad intent. Instead, the order focused on the practical imbalance. The HOA was continuing to collect money and restrict access while its claimed rental authority remained unsupported. Management restored my remote the next afternoon. I did not rush down to the garage or demand that the resident move immediately. The order gave him time, and he had followed the rules he had been given. We arranged a date for him to remove the car and return the HOA-issued remote. The association could no longer collect from G12 while calling my ownership unresolved. But the order was temporary. I still did not know who had changed the chart, how long the rental program had relied on it, or how much money had moved through the garage and storage account. The court had stopped the next payment and returned practical control to me. Now discovery would have to explain the system behind it. Discovery began with document requests, and the first production arrived 3 weeks later. The payment ledger showed 7 charges of $250 each, all tied to G12. The gross rent totaled $1,750. Mason had retained $25 from each payment as an administrative fee, for a total of $175, and transferred the remaining $1,575 into Ridgeview's operating fund. The records included email threads and versions of the parking chart. One message from a former manager explained that the chart had been created as an access tool, not as a record of ownership. Another note warned that any garage assignment had to be checked against the deed and recorded condo plan before a rental agreement was issued. That note had been sent to Elaine during a review of Ridgeview's rental program. I had not known that when I first opened G12 or when the board warned me to stay away. I learned it only because the documents were produced in the case. Until then, I had suspected the chart was being used beyond its purpose. Now the HOA's own records showed that. The emails also explained why the program had expanded. Ridgeview's operating budget had developed a shortfall, and garage rentals were treated as one way to increase revenue without raising monthly assessments. Elaine had approved the continued use of the chart because it made spaces appear available. The records did not prove every garage rental was improper. Some spaces may have belonged to the association or been rented with valid owner consent. But G12 was different. The file contained no consent from me, no agreement from a prior owner, and no recorded document transferring control. 7 payments had been collected. Ridgeview had received $1,575 after Mason's fees. Mason had retained $175. Nothing had been sent to me. The 7th payment was the one processed after my written objection and the board's review of the deed and condo plan. My attorney organized the evidence into one chain. The recorded plan identified the legal layout, the deed identified my interest, the internal chart changed how the space was treated, the rental agreement transferred practical control, and the ledger showed the resulting revenue. That chain did not depend on guessing anyone's thoughts. It depended on documents the HOA had created, kept, and used. Ridgeview's annual owners' meeting was 6 weeks away, and several owners had asked that garage controls be placed on the agenda. Mason's management contract was due to expire at the end of the quarter, which meant the board would soon have to vote on renewal. By the end of discovery, the board could no longer describe G12 as a parking misunderstanding. The condo plan had exposed the weakness in the chart, and the payment records had shown what that weakness produced. The next question was whether Ridgeview would continue defending the arrangement or accept a resolution that returned the money, corrected the records, and prevented the same process from being used again. Until discovery, Ridgeview had defended the rental as a long-standing administrative practice. Now the board's own records showed that the parking chart was never meant to establish ownership, that G12 had been rented without my consent, and that the 7th payment had been collected after the board reviewed my deed and the recorded plan. My attorney sent a final proposal focused on correction rather than spectacle. The HOA would recognize my exclusive control of G12, cancel the rental agreement, return the $1,575 that entered its operating fund, reimburse the storage costs I had documented, and contribute toward my legal fees. Mason would separately return the $175 in administrative fees it had retained. Ridgeview would also correct its garage schedule and stop using the old chart as a substitute for deed review. The board did not accept immediately. Its lawyer disputed several fee entries and argued that any resolution should not be described as an admission of intentional wrongdoing. My attorney agreed that the language had to match what the record proved. The case supported unauthorized control, continued collection after notice, and a defective internal process. It did not support inventing a criminal finding or claiming the board had confessed to fraud. After 2 more rounds of revisions, the parties submitted a stipulated final judgment to the circuit court. The judgment recognized my exclusive control of G12, terminated the rental agreement, and required the full $1,750 in gross rent to be returned through the separate payments already allocated between Ridgeview and Mason. It also required reimbursement of my documented storage expenses and an agreed contribution toward attorney fees. The judgment ordered Ridgeview to issue a corrected garage schedule and adopt a written verification process for future rentals. No space could be assigned until management checked the deed, the recorded condo plan, and any written owner consent. The court retained jurisdiction to enforce those terms. The loss of control mattered more than the money. At the annual owners' meeting, residents voted to recall Elaine from the board. After the recall, the remaining directors elected a new president. Mason's contract remained in place until its scheduled expiration, but the board voted not to renew it. There was no dramatic criminal case, no instant bankruptcy, and no courtroom confession. The consequence was narrower and more direct. The people who had controlled the garage lost the rent, lost the policy that enabled it, and lost the positions that allowed the arrangement to continue. The garage was empty when I opened it with my restored remote. For the first time, the door lifted because I pressed the button, not because management had granted temporary access. The painted number still read G12. This time, the space, the remote, and the deed finally matched. I walked through the garage, checking the floor and lock housing. Nothing had been damaged. The resident who had used the space had removed his car on schedule and returned the HOA-issued remote. He had also received confirmation that Ridgeview would not charge him again. I ended the storage unit rental and submitted the final receipt under the judgment. A week later, Ridgeview's payment arrived for the $1,575 it had received, along with the storage reimbursement and the agreed attorney fee contribution. Mason separately returned the $175 in administrative fees it had retained. The correction took longer. Ridgeview issued a new garage schedule to every owner. The old chart was marked obsolete. The replacement process required management to compare each proposed assignment with the deed, the recorded condo plan, and any written owner consent before issuing a permit or remote. No employee could approve a rental alone. 2 signatures were required, and the board had to review an annual reconciliation between its internal records and the recorded ownership documents. The association sent notices to owners whose garages had appeared on the old chart. Those notices did not assume every prior rental was improper. They asked owners to verify the records before any arrangement continued. The goal was not a second wave of accusations. It was to stop an internal document from replacing ownership records. Because the circuit court retained jurisdiction over the stipulated final judgment, Ridgeview could not lawfully place G12 back into the rental program without violating the terms it had accepted. The corrected schedule listed G12 under Unit 3B, and management confirmed that no future assignment could be made without my written consent. Months earlier, I had stood outside the same door with a dead remote while someone else's car sat inside. The HOA had a permit, a rental agreement, and a payment system that made me look like the intruder. Now the door opened when I asked it to. The condo plan had not solved the dispute by itself. What changed the outcome was preserving the records, matching each claim to the right document, and putting the conflict before people who had authority to act. I had my garage back, every dollar collected from it had been returned, and Ridgeview could not lawfully rent G12 again without my written consent.